The crystal flute of champagne trembled slightly in Celeste Marlowe's grasp, its golden bubbles rising like whispers of something unspeakable. Tonight marked 10 years of marriage, an anniversary meant for candlelight promises and quiet reverence. Instead, the air at Aria shimmered with something colder. Across the table, Julian Ashford looked every inch the polished executive, his charm carved in candlelight, his smile just a shade too tight. To his right sat Vivian Dane, radiant, audacious, and entirely out of place, a guest at their private celebration, a threat hiding in plain sight. 6 months pregnant, Celeste felt the baby stir, and with it, a silent warning. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the performance was about to shatter. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The lie tasted of vintage Dom Perignon and seared scallops. "To 10 years, Julian said, raising his glass. His voice, usually a warm baritone that could soothe frantic investors and charm stubborn clients, had a brittle edge. "And to the future." Celeste met his gaze over the rim of her glass, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "To the future," she echoed, her eyes flicking involuntarily to Vivian. Vivian Dane was everything Celeste wasn't, at least on the surface. She was sharp angles and bold colors, her crimson dress a slash of defiance in the restaurant's muted elegance. Her laughter was loud, her ambition unconcealed. She'd been at Innovatech Solutions for 2 years, a rising star Julian had personally mentored. Celeste, the company's founder and silent majority owner, had approved her hiring, seeing a reflection of her own younger, hungrier self in Vivian's resume. Now, she just saw a predator. "I can't thank you both enough for having me," Vivian said, her voice dripping with a practiced sincerity. "It's an honor to celebrate with you. 10 years is incredible. Truly." "We believe in celebrating milestones," Julian said, his hand finding Celeste's on the table. It was a gesture for the audience of one. His touch was cold, a proprietary claim rather than an intimate connection. The large diamond on Celeste's finger, a gift from their 5th anniversary, felt like a miniature shackle. Celeste withdrew her hand under the pretense of adjusting her napkin on her lap. The baby kicked, a sudden insistent thump against her ribs. "I know," she thought, a silent message to her unborn child. "I feel it too." She had founded Innovatech with the inheritance from her parents, a brilliant software engineer with a vision for AI-driven logistics that was years ahead of its time. But she was an architect, not a salesman. She loved the clean, logical world of code, not the messy, ego-driven world of boardrooms. Julian, with his MBA and charismatic charm, had been the perfect partner in life, and, she thought, in business. She'd made him CEO, trusting him to build the empire while she retained ownership, the quiet power behind the throne. It was a partnership that, from the outside, looked perfect. He was the face. She was the foundation. But foundations can tremble. "Actually," Julian said, clearing his throat and shifting in his seat. He cast a look at Vivian, a shared secret glance that struck Celeste with the force of a physical blow. "There's another reason I wanted Vivian here tonight. Another milestone to celebrate." The air in their private alcove grew thick, heavy with unspoken words. The distant murmur of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Celeste's ears. She watched, as if in slow motion, as Julian's hand left the table and found Vivian's. Their fingers intertwined. A perfect, damning fit. "Julian, what are you doing?" Celeste's voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the sudden, deafening silence. Vivian's expression shifted from feigned deference to triumphant pride. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face. "Julian?" she prompted, her voice soft but firm. He turned his gaze back to Celeste. The charm was gone, replaced by a cool, almost clinical resolve. Celeste, this has been difficult for a long time. We've been living separate lives under the same roof. You've been so consumed by your projects and now the baby. We've grown apart. It was a classic cowardly script, and he delivered it with chilling precision. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them right there at the table. Grown apart? Celeste felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her chest, but she choked it down. Julian, I'm carrying your child. We had breakfast together this morning. You kissed me goodbye. A formality, he said, waving a dismissive hand. We both know the intimacy has been gone for years. It was a lie so audacious, so cruel, that it stole her breath. He was rewriting their history in real time, erasing every moment of tenderness, every shared laugh, every whispered dream. He was invalidating her, them everything. Vivian chose that moment to deliver the killing blow. She held up her left hand, which had been resting in her lap. A new, ostentatious diamond ring glittered on her fourth finger, a garish twin to the one Celeste wore. Julian and I are getting married, Vivian announced, her voice ringing with victory. She looked directly at Celeste, her eyes shining with a venomous pity. He asked me last week. I wanted to wait for the right time to tell you, but Julian insisted. He believes in honesty. Honesty. The word was a profanity. The world tilted. The champagne flute slipped from Celeste's nerveless fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull thud, its contents bleeding into the fibers like a wound. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm settled over her. Her mind, the same mind that could architect complex algorithms and see patterns in chaotic data, was processing the variables of this new, horrific equation. The betrayal was one thing. The public humiliation was another. But the strategic calculation behind it, that was the most terrifying part. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a coup. He was CEO. He ran the company. He had the board's loyalty, the investors' trust. In his mind, he was Innovatech. She, the pregnant, reclusive owner, was just a legacy obstacle, and Vivian was his queen, the ambitious partner who would help him secure his kingdom. Celeste looked from Julian's resolute face to Vivian's smug one. They thought they had won. They saw a heartbroken, hormonal, pregnant wife about to be cast aside. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had forgotten one crucial detail, the bedrock on which their entire world was built. He might be the CEO, but she was the owner. She had been the silent foundation for a decade, but foundations don't just support. They can also break. Slowly, deliberately, Celeste placed her hands on her swollen belly. A surge of protective fury, colder and harder than any grief, solidified in her core. It wasn't just her company anymore. It wasn't just her life. It was her child's legacy. She rose from the table, her movement steady, her spine straight. The performance was over, and a new one was about to begin. "Excuse me," she said, her voice impossibly even. "I believe this conversation is over." She turned and walked away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of a 10-year lie. The gaudy diamond on Vivian's hand, glittering like a shard of broken glass. She didn't look back. The drive home from Aria was 22 minutes of suffocating silence. Julian drove the Mercedes, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. He had expected tears, hysterics, a scene. He had prepared for a storm. Celeste's cold, surgical calm was something for which he had no defense. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She hadn't said a word since leaving the restaurant. Their home, a sprawling minimalist masterpiece in the Hollywood Hills that had once been featured in an architectural magazine, felt cavernous and hostile when they entered. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering panorama of Los Angeles, a city of dreams that now felt like a city of ghosts. Julian finally broke the silence as he tossed his keys onto a marble console table. "Celeste, we need to talk about this like adults." Celeste turned slowly to face him. The ambient light from the city below cast long shadows across her face, making her familiar features seem alien. "Do adults announce their new engagement at their wife's anniversary dinner?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that in the manual?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he began, falling back on the coward's first line of defense. Vivian got excited. The moment felt right. "The moment felt right?" Celeste laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "The moment you chose to detonate a bomb in my life felt right? No, Julian, this was a power play. This was calculated." "You're being hysterical," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "Your hormones are all over the place. We can discuss the terms of the separation when you're calmer. I'll be generous, of course. For you and the baby." The terms. He was already talking about terms. As if their marriage was a hostile takeover to be negotiated. And his mention of her hormones was the final, clarifying insult. He saw her pregnancy not as the future they had planned, but as a weakness he could exploit. "Generous?" she repeated, stepping closer. For the first time that night, he saw the fire return to her eyes, and he took an involuntary step back. "You're going to be generous with my money? With the company I built? The home I paid for?" "Our company, Celeste," he corrected, his jaw tightening. "I made it what it is. I put in the work, the sweat. I built the relationships. You've been hiding behind your computer for years. The board, the staff. They see me as Innovatech." "Then they're about to get a rude awakening," she said. She turned and walked towards the master suite. Julian, assuming she was retreating, followed. "I'll sleep in the guest wing tonight," he said, a peace offering that cost him nothing. "We can have our lawyers talk next week. Keep it clean. For the company." Celeste paused at the bedroom door. "You won't be sleeping here at all, Julian." She walked into the room, and he watched, confused, as she went directly to the integrated wall panel. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing in a code he'd never seen before. A series of soft clicks echoed through the house. "What are you doing?" he asked, a flicker of unease in his voice. "I founded this company on creating secure, intelligent systems, remember?" she said without looking at him. "Our home is the beta test for Innovatech's new smart security suite. Facial recognition, voice print analysis, tiered access protocols. Very sophisticated." She turned to him, a chillingly serene smile on her face. "Your access to the house, the gates, the garage, the digital accounts linked to this address has just been revoked. The system will update globally in 5 minutes." Julian stared at her, dumbfounded. "You can't be serious. You're kicking me out?" "I'm securing my assets," she corrected him. "You have 4 minutes to collect your personal effects. I suggest you start with the contents of your pockets. After that, you'll be trespassing." His face, a mask of arrogant composure just moments before, began to crumble. This wasn't the script. "Celeste, this is insane. You can't do this." "Watch me," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You and Vivian made a critical miscalculation. You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed my trust was ignorance. You staged a public ambush to humiliate me, to fracture my confidence, to make me fold. You wanted to make me the distraught, abandoned wife so you could sweep in and take control of the company out of necessity." She took another step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You wanted a war, Julian. You just misidentified your enemy. You thought you were fighting your wife. You're not. You're fighting the founder and majority shareholder of Innovatech Solutions, and she has just been activated." The reality of his situation began to dawn on him. The house, the cars, the accounts, they were all tied to her, a fact he'd conveniently ignored while playing the role of king. "You have 2 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. Panic finally broke through his facade. He scrambled, grabbing a watch from the dresser, his wallet, fumbling for his car keys, realizing with a jolt they were the ones he'd tossed on the console. A soft chime echoed through the house. "System locked," said a calm, automated female voice from the wall panel. Julian's face went pale. He ran out of the bedroom and tried the front door. It was immovable. "Celeste, open the door!" he yelled, his voice laced with desperation. Celeste walked calmly out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the short flight of stairs leading down to the foyer. She looked down at the man who was now, effectively, a prisoner in the gilded cage he had helped build. "Goodbye, Julian," she said. She pressed another button on her phone. The service entrance at the side of the house clicked open. "The service door is unlocked. I believe it's a fitting exit for you." He stared at her, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had walked in tonight expecting to be the victor, the master of his new destiny. Now he was being dismissed like a disgraced employee. He stalked towards the service door, turning back one last time. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "No, Julian," Celeste said, her hand resting on her child. "You will." She watched him disappear into the night, then locked the final door. The silence that filled the house was no longer suffocating. It was absolute. It was hers. Alone in the vast, empty space, the adrenaline began to fade, and a single hot tear finally traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of rage. The war had just begun. Her first call wasn't to her mother or a friend. It was to Beatrice Hale, her father's old law partner and the sharpest corporate attorney in California. "Beatrice," she said when the older woman answered, "it's Celeste. We have a problem. Activate the Marlowe Protocol." The Marlowe Protocol was not a legal document. It was a state of mind. It was a term Celeste and Beatrice had coined years ago, a hypothetical contingency plan for a catastrophic corporate threat. They had never imagined the threat would be sleeping in Celeste's bed. Beatrice, a woman whose demeanor was as sharp as her tailored suits, didn't waste time with condolences. "Details, now," she commanded over the phone. Celeste recounted the evening with the detached precision of an engineer describing a system failure. The dinner, Vivian's ring, Julian's speech. Her own countermove with the house security. "Good," Beatrice said, a rare note of approval in her voice. "Locking him out was the correct opening move. It establishes control. He'll play the victim. He'll go to the board and say his pregnant wife had a hormonal breakdown and threw him out for no reason." "I know," Celeste said, pacing the living room, the city lights below seeming to mock her. "That was the point of his public spectacle. He's building a narrative." "Then we build a better one, a truer one," Beatrice stated. "First step, you disappear. Not in a scared and hiding way, but in a strategic retreat way. He can't paint you as unstable if you're not there to be provoked. Where can you go that is secure, private, and yours alone?" The answer came to her immediately. The lake house. The house at Lake Arrowhead had been her real home, the place her parents had built, a rustic A-frame of cedar and glass nestled among pine trees. It was where she'd written the first lines of code for what would become Innovatech. It was off-grid, analog, and filled with memories of a time before Julian. It was her fortress of solitude. "Perfect," Beatrice said. "I'll have a security team sweep it and meet you there tomorrow afternoon. They'll be discreet. From now on, you communicate only through encrypted channels. No personal email, no standard calls. Julian has had CEO-level access to your digital life for years. Assume everything is compromised. Go dark, Celeste. Become a ghost." Within the hour, Celeste had packed a single bag. Clothes, a few books, and the original, dog-eared notebooks filled with the algorithms that were the soul of her company. Before she left, she walked into the nursery. It was fully furnished, a serene space of soft grays and yellows. A mobile of hand-carved wooden planets hung over the crib. Julian had insisted on assembling it himself. The memory was now tainted, another prop in his long con. The sight of it solidified her resolve. This fight was for the tiny person who would one day sleep under those planets. The 2-hour drive up into the mountains was a journey back in time. The sleek freeways of LA gave way to winding mountain roads. The air grew crisp and smelled of pine. When she finally pulled up to the Marlowe family lake house, it was just as she remembered. Solid, unpretentious, real. The next few days were a blur of calculated silence and strategic planning. True to her word, Beatrice arrived with 2 security experts who swept the property for bugs and secured the perimeter. They established a satellite link for a secure internet connection. Beatrice spread a mountain of corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements across the heavy oak dining table. "Here's the situation," Beatrice began, her finger tapping a clause in the Innovatech founding charter. "You own 62% of the company. The other 38% is split among early investors and a small employee stock pool. Julian owns a token 1%, a grant you gave him on your 5th anniversary." She looked up, her expression grim. "The irony is sickening." "But he's the CEO, Celeste said. "He chairs the board meetings. He has their ear." "He's the CEO because you appointed him," Beatrice countered. "And according to Article 7, Section B of the bylaws, a clause your father insisted I write in for you, the majority shareholder has the right to call an emergency board meeting at any time, for any reason, and can appoint or dismiss C-suite executives with a simple majority vote. Your 62% is more than a simple majority. It's a monarchy." Celeste stared at the document. "He doesn't know about this clause? He's probably read it, but he hasn't understood its power. He thinks the board is a council of his allies. He's forgotten that you are the board, if you choose to be. His entire strategy is based on the assumption that you'll fight him in divorce court, not in the boardroom." A plan began to form, clean and logical as a line of code. While Julian was in LA, spinning his tale of a volatile, emotional wife, Celeste would prepare for war. Her first call on the encrypted line was to Sebastian Linwood. Sebastian was Innovatech's head of R&D, a brilliant, socially awkward coder who had been her first hire. He was loyal to the technology, not the corporate politics. "Sebastian, it's Celeste." "Celeste, we were worried. Julian told us you were taking some personal time, that you weren't well," he said, his voice full of genuine concern. "I'm fine, Sebastian. I need your help," she said, cutting to the chase. "I need to know what's happening inside. I need to know what Julian is doing." Sebastian hesitated for only a second. "He's consolidating power. He held an all-hands meeting this morning, talked about stability and continued leadership during a difficult personal time. He promoted Vivian to Chief Marketing Officer. People are uneasy." "Vivian is CMO?" The audacity was breathtaking. "Sebastian, I need eyes and ears. Anonymously. I need to know what he's accessing, who he's meeting with, especially financial records." "I can do that," Sebastian said, his voice lowering. "There are back doors, your original back doors. He won't see me coming." For the next week, the lake house became a war room. During the day, Celeste and Beatrice mapped out the legal strategy. They prepared motions, drafted statements, and planned the emergency board meeting down to the second. At night, Celeste would walk by the lake, the cold mountain air clearing her head. She allowed herself to grieve, not for Julian, but for the life she thought she had, for the trust she had so freely given. She remembered his proposal, his promises, the way he'd championed her ideas when she was too shy to voice them herself. Had it all been a lie? Or had the man she married simply eroded over time, worn down by greed and ambition? The question was a painful one, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. She had to focus on the man he was now. Sebastian's reports came in nightly, encrypted data packets that painted a damning picture. Julian was meeting with investors, assuring them it was business as usual. He was working with the CFO, a man he'd hired 2 years ago, to reallocate budgets. He was moving money, funneling funds into new marketing initiatives that would be run by Vivian. He was acting like a king who had finally inherited his kingdom, One evening, Sebastian sent a file that made Celeste's blood run cold. It was a preliminary draft, drawn up by Julian's personal lawyer for a corporate restructuring. The plan was to create a new parent company with a new board and have that company acquire Innovatech's assets. In the new structure, Julian was listed as the principal shareholder. He was trying to dilute her 62% into oblivion. He was trying to steal her company right out from under her. "This is it," Celeste said, showing the document to Beatrice. "This is his endgame." Beatrice nodded, her expression like stone. "It's bold, sloppy, and illegal as hell, and it's the ammunition we need. He's overplayed his hand. It's time to call the meeting." Celeste looked out the window at the dark, placid water of the lake. She had come here seeking refuge, but it had become her crucible. She had been forged into something new, something harder. The reclusive founder was gone. The CEO's wife was a ghost. In her place was a monarch, ready to reclaim her throne. "Schedule it, Beatrice," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Friday morning. Tell them the majority shareholder will be in attendance." The Innovatech Solutions boardroom was Julian's stage. It was a testament to his aesthetic: a long obsidian black table, chairs of chrome and Italian leather, and a panoramic view of the city he felt he had conquered. He sat at the head of the table, exuding an aura of sober, confident control. Vivienne was seated to his right, in her new, unearned capacity as CMO, looking sleek and powerful in a charcoal pantsuit. The other board members, a collection of venture capitalists and industry veterans Julian had personally courted, murmured amongst themselves. They were confused by the sudden, cryptic summons for an emergency shareholder meeting, but Julian had preemptively soothed them. "I know this is unusual," he'd told them before the meeting officially began, his voice pitched with just the right amount of weary gravity. "As some of you know, Celeste and I are going through a difficult separation. I'm afraid she's not taking it well. This meeting is likely an emotional, impulsive reaction. I ask for your patience. Our priority must be the stability of the company." He had framed the narrative perfectly. They saw him as the steady hand at the tiller, navigating both corporate and personal storms. They saw a man protecting his legacy from an unstable ex-wife. At precisely 10 Hanoi AM, the double doors of the boardroom swung open. It was Beatrice Hale who entered first, her presence immediately sucking the casual confidence out of the room. The older board members knew her by reputation, a shark in a Chanel suit. They sat up a little straighter, but it was the person who followed her that caused a collective intake of breath. Celeste. She was not the disheveled, weeping woman Julian had described. She was radiant, composed, and exuded an authority that was palpable. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress that accommodated her pregnancy without hiding it, she looked not like a victim, but like a queen. Her hair was pulled back, her face was clear, and her eyes, when they met Julian's, were as cold and sharp as ice. Julian's face, for a fleeting second, registered pure shock. He had expected her to dial in, a disembodied, hysterical voice on a speakerphone. He had not expected her to be here, in his domain, looking like this. Vivienne's smile faltered, a flicker of insecurity crossing her features before she masked it with a look of detached professionalism. "Celeste," Julian said, recovering quickly, his voice hardening. "This is highly irregular. We were told you'd be joining remotely." "I changed my mind," Celeste said, her voice calm and clear as it filled the room. She and Beatrice took 2 empty seats opposite Julian. "I felt a matter of this importance required a personal touch. Good morning, everyone." She nodded to the other board members, a few of whom offered weak, uncertain smiles. "As this is an emergency meeting called by the majority shareholder," Beatrice began, her voice crisp and formal as she opened a leather-bound folder, "Ms. Marlowe will be chairing it." This was the first blow. Julian's jaw tightened. "I am the chairman and CEO. A title you hold at the pleasure of the majority shareholder, as stipulated in the corporate bylaws, which I have helpfully distributed," Beatrice said, nodding to the folders that had been placed before each member. "Please, turn to Article 7, Section B." A rustling of paper filled the room. Julian's eyes darted down to the text, his face paling slightly as he read the words he had so arrogantly ignored. He had assumed power was about performance, about charm and relationships. He had forgotten it was written in ink. "According to the agenda," Celeste said, taking command, "the first item of business is a review of executive leadership and corporate governance." She looked directly at Julian. "Julian, for 10 years, I entrusted you with the operational control of my company. While I focused on innovation, you were meant to be its steward. It has recently come to my attention that you have profoundly abused that trust." "This is a personal vendetta," Julian sputtered, trying to regain control. "She's using the company to lash out at me over our divorce." "Am I?" Celeste countered smoothly. She nodded to Beatrice. "We have evidence," Beatrice stated, "that in the last 10 days, Mr. Ashford, without board consultation, has attempted to reallocate significant funds towards unbudgeted marketing ventures, to be managed by a newly appointed executive, Ms. Vivian Dane, whose promotion was also not approved by the board." Vivian flinched as if struck. All eyes turned to her. "Furthermore," Beatrice continued, her voice relentless, "we have a draft proposal, commissioned by Mr. Ashford, outlining a complete corporate restructuring designed to create a new parent entity and dilute the holdings of the current majority shareholder. In layman's terms, he was trying to steal the company." She slid a copy of the proposal down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Victor Alden, the most respected venture capitalist on the board. He picked it up, his expression turning grim as he read it. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from awkward to arctic. The board members were no longer looking at Julian as a charismatic leader. They were looking at him as a liability. This is taken out of context," Julian stammered, his composure shattering. "These were exploratory ideas for growth." "The only thing you were exploring, Julian," Celeste said, her voice cutting through his defense, "was the depth of your own greed. You conspired with your mistress, a woman you promoted with company funds, to undermine me personally and professionally. You did it in public, to create a narrative of my instability. And you did it in private, to strip me of my life's work. It was a bold plan. But you forgot who you were dealing with." She stood up, her presence commanding the room. Her pregnancy was no longer a sign of vulnerability, but a symbol of her fierce, protective power. "Therefore, as is my right as the owner of 62% of Innovatech Solutions, I call for a vote on the immediate termination of Julian Ashford as CEO and chairman of the board, for cause." She let the words hang in the air. "All in favor?" She raised her hand. Her 62% vote hung in the air, an unassailable fact. It was over before it began. Victor Alden, after a moment's hesitation, slowly raised his hand. "Aye." Another member followed. Then another. It was a cascade. Julian sat, stunned into silence, watching his kingdom crumble. Vivian stared at her hands, her face a mask of humiliation. The power couple of Innovatech, a fiction they had created just days ago, had been exposed as a fraud and a fool. "The motion passes," Celeste announced into the stunned silence. "Julian, your employment at Innovatech Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your corporate accounts and access have already been revoked." As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. "And a final piece of business," Celeste said, turning her attention to the last person. Her gaze fell upon Vivian, who visibly shrank in her chair. "Ms. Dane," Celeste said, her voice devoid of emotion, "your promotion to CMO is rescinded. Your employment is also terminated, effective immediately, for conspiring to defraud the company." Vivian looked up, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Julian for help, but he was staring into space, a broken man. He couldn't save her. He had never truly had the power to. Celeste surveyed the scene, the defeated lover, the disgraced CEO, the shocked board. She had not screamed, she had not cried. She had simply enforced the rules. "The board will reconvene on Monday to discuss interim leadership," Celeste announced. "This meeting is adjourned." She turned, and with Beatrice at her side, walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of silent devastation in her wake. The coup was complete. The crown was hers once more. Victory in the boardroom was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of a messy, brutal insurgency. Julian Ashford was not a man who accepted defeat. Stripped of his title and publicly humiliated, he became a cornered animal, lashing out with a viciousness Celeste had underestimated. His first move was a media blitz. Within hours, stories began to leak to tech blogs and gossip columns, painting a picture of a scorned, vindictive billionaire heiress who used her corporate power to punish her estranged husband. Anonymous sources from within the company spoke of Celeste's erratic behavior and long-standing emotional instability. It was a transparent, desperate smear campaign, but it was effective. The Innovatech stock wobbled. Clients grew nervous. "He's trying to burn the kingdom down now that he can't rule it," Beatrice said grimly, holding up a tablet displaying a particularly nasty headline. They were back in Celeste's home office, which had been converted into a new command center. "Let him," Celeste said, her focus on a screen full of data. She had appointed Sebastian Linwood as interim CTO and an older, steady board member, Victor Alden, as interim CEO to calm the markets. Her own role remained where it was most powerful. Majority owner, the ultimate authority. "He's creating noise. I'm focused on the signal." The signal was the damage Julian had done from the inside. With Sebastian's help, Celeste initiated a full forensic audit of the company's finances during Julian's last year as CEO. What they began to uncover was staggering. "It's a shadow ledger," Sebastian explained during a late-night secure video call, his face pale with exhaustion. He didn't just use company funds for lavish dinners with Vivian. He set up shell corporations, consultancies that billed Innovatech for strategic advice. The invoices were approved by him and the CFO he hired. Millions, Celeste. Millions are gone. It was worse than she thought. This wasn't just infidelity and a power grab. It was grand larceny. He had been systematically bleeding her company dry to fund a new life for himself, likely planning to use the stolen capital to launch his new, restructured version of the company after he'd pushed her out. The betrayal cut deeper than any personal slight. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had plundered her parents' legacy, the work of her hands and mind. While Beatrice's legal team began preparing a criminal case, Julian escalated his attacks. He started poaching. Using the client lists he'd memorized and the relationships he'd built on Celeste's dime, he began contacting Innovatech's key accounts. He offered them a better deal, a future with a new, more dynamic company he was about to launch, free from the drama at Innovatech. This was his most dangerous move. A company like Innovatech was built on trust and long-term contracts. If he could peel away 2 or 3 major clients, it could trigger a catastrophic loss of confidence. Celeste knew she couldn't fight him on his terms. She couldn't out-schmooze him. So she did what she did best. She changed the game. She called a virtual town hall for all Innovatech employees. Her face appeared on screens throughout the company, broadcasting not from a sterile boardroom, but from the R&D lab, the true heart of the company. She didn't talk about Julian. She didn't talk about betrayal. She talked about the future. "For too long," she began, her voice filled with a passion the employees had never heard from her. "Our focus has been on sales, on growth at any cost. We've been chasing market share instead of defining the market. That ends today." She unveiled 3 new projects she had been quietly developing at the lake house, projects that were years ahead of anything their competitors were doing. A predictive logistics AI that could anticipate supply chain disruptions before they happened. A new level of encryption that was quantum computer resistant. It was a vision of the future that was bold, brilliant, and undeniably hers. "I am not just the owner of this company," she told them, her hand resting on her belly. "I am its chief architect. And this," she said, patting a server rack next to her, "is where the magic happens. Not in fancy restaurants or boardrooms. We are going back to our roots." We are going to be a company of builders again, not just salesmen. The speech was a masterstroke. It reignited the passion of the engineers, the developers, the true believers. It reminded them why they had joined Innovatech in the first place. Sebastian later told her the internal chat channels had exploded with excitement. She had reclaimed the company's soul. Meanwhile, Vivian Dane was unraveling. Cast out from Innovatech and abandoned by Julian, who now saw her as part of the baggage from his spectacular failure, she found herself an industry pariah. The flashy diamond ring was gone, likely sold. Her calls to Julian went unanswered. He had used her as a battering ram to break down Celeste's door, and when the ram broke, he'd simply left it in the dirt. She saw the articles Julian planted, branding Celeste as unstable, and she knew they were lies. She had been there. She had seen Celeste's cold fury, her strategic mind at work. She had fatally underestimated her. More than that, she had fatally overestimated Julian. She had fallen for the illusion of power he projected, never realizing it was all borrowed, all conditional on the silence of the woman he was betraying. Desperate and with her options dwindling, Vivian started looking back over her emails, her texts with Julian, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. And in her search, she found them. The wire transfer confirmations, the invoices from shell companies Julian had her approve under the guise of discreet marketing initiatives. She hadn't understood what they were at the time, blinded by ambition and what she'd mistaken for love. Now, she saw them for what they were, evidence. She was not just a co-conspirator, she was a scapegoat with a paper trail leading right to her. Julian hadn't just abandoned her, he had set her up to take the fall. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had helped a man try to destroy a powerful woman, and in the end, he was perfectly willing to destroy her too. Her betrayal had earned her nothing but her own ruin. With shaking hands, she looked up the phone number for Beatrice Hale, attorney at law. She had one last card to play, one last move in a game she had already lost. It wasn't a move for power or for money. It was a move for survival. The call came to Beatrice first. "It's Vivian Dane," Beatrice said, her voice a mixture of surprise and suspicion as she spoke to Celeste over the secure line. "She wants to meet with you. She says she has information that will end this." Celeste's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of seeing Vivian's face again, of sitting in the same room with the woman who had so smugly announced the destruction of her marriage, was nauseating. "It's a trap," Celeste said flatly. "I don't think so," Beatrice countered. "I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I can smell desperation over the phone. She's not a threat anymore, Celeste. She's scorched earth. Julian has cut her loose and she knows she's implicated in the fraud. She's terrified." Celeste considered it. Her logical mind pushed past the emotional revulsion. Vivian was a variable she hadn't accounted for, a loose end. And a desperate person was a dangerous, unpredictable thing. Perhaps it was better to know what she wanted. "Fine," Celeste agreed, her voice hard. "But on my terms, neutral ground, just me and her. You can be nearby, but not in the room. I need to do this alone." She chose a small, quiet cafe in a Pasadena art district, a place with no memories and no significance. When she walked in, Vivian was already there, huddled in a corner booth. The change in her was shocking. The confident, crimson-clad woman from Aria was gone. This Vivian looked small, pale, and haunted. She was nursing a single cup of coffee, her hands wrapped around it as if for warmth. Celeste slid into the booth opposite her. She didn't say a word, just met Vivian's gaze and waited. "Thank you for coming," Vivian began, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet Celeste's eyes, focusing instead on the worn tabletop. "I know you have no reason to." "I don't," Celeste said simply. Vivian flinched, but nodded. "I deserve that." She took a shaky breath. "He played me, Celeste. I know that sounds like an excuse, but it's the truth. He made me believe He made me believe you were this cold, detached woman, that your marriage was a business arrangement. He made me feel like I was rescuing him. And the wedding announcement, was that part of the rescue mission? Celeste asked, her voice dangerously soft. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but she fought them back. That was hubris. It was cruel. I saw you, with your perfect life, your company, your legacy, and I wanted to be the one to take it. I hated you for having it all, and I was proud that I was the one he chose. It was ugly, and I'm so sorry. The apology hung in the air, shockingly sincere. Celeste felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, but a grim, shared understanding. She saw Vivian not as a monster, but as a reflection of a different kind of ambition, one that had curdled into something toxic. Why are you here, Vivian? Vivian finally looked up, her eyes pleading. He's going to pin the fraud on me. He had me approve invoices, sign off on payments to consultancies I'd never heard of. I have the emails. He told me they were for market disruption projects. I was so eager to prove myself, I just did it. I have copies of everything. She slid a slim USB drive across the table. This is all of it, Vivian continued. The wire transfers, his private emails about the restructuring plan, texts where he talks about how to handle your emotional reaction. It's everything you need to prove premeditated criminal intent. It's enough to send him to prison. Celeste looked at the drive, then back at Vivian. What do you want in return? Immunity, Vivian said quickly. A deal with the DA, I'll testify against him. I'll tell them everything. I don't want to go to jail for being his fool. Her voice cracked on the last word. He destroyed my life, Celeste. My career is over. He took everything from me, just like he tried to take everything from you. In that moment, Celeste didn't see a rival. She saw another victim of Julian's corrosive narcissism. They were two women on opposite sides of the same man's wreckage. There was no triumph in Vivian's downfall, only a profound sense of waste. He told me you weren't strong enough to run the company, Vivian whispered, a final bitter confession. He said you were just the idea person and that he was the engine. He was wrong. You're not just the engine. You're the whole damn machine. Celeste sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the last few weeks settling on her. The betrayal, the fight, the cold fury. It had all been necessary. It had shown her a strength she didn't know she possessed. But seeing Vivian, broken and desperate, showed her the human cost of Julian's war. It wasn't a victory to be celebrated. Give the drive to my lawyer, Celeste said finally, her voice softer now. She's waiting at the coffee shop across the street. Tell her everything. If you are telling the truth, and you cooperate fully, she will speak to the district attorney on your behalf. Vivian's shoulders slumped with relief, a wave of it so profound it was almost painful to watch. Thank you, she breathed. Celeste stood to leave. Celeste, Vivian called after her, her voice small. For what it's worth. I hope it's a girl, and I hope she's just like you. Celeste paused at the door, her back to Vivian. She didn't turn around. She simply gave a slight nod and walked out into the sunlight, leaving the ghosts of the past behind her in the dark corner of the cafe. She had what she needed to end it. Not just with a corporate victory, but with decisive, inescapable justice. The end for Julian Ashford came not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable click of handcuffs. Armed with the evidence from the forensic audit and Vivian's damning testimony, the district attorney's office moved swiftly. They arrested him at his temporary residence, a soulless corporate apartment paid for by his dwindling personal funds, on charges of grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The ensuing legal battle was short and brutal. Faced with incontrovertible proof and his former mistress testifying against him, Julian's bravado evaporated. The charming CEO was replaced by a haggard, desperate defendant. The court froze his assets, The board members he had once called allies refused his calls. He was utterly, completely alone. He accepted a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, ultimately being sentenced to 7 years in a medium-security federal prison. The man who had graced the covers of business magazines was now a cautionary tale, a mugshot on the evening news. Celeste watched the news report from the nursery in her home. She felt no joy, no sense of triumph. Just a quiet, profound finality. It was over. The cancer had been excised. In the months that followed, Celeste poured her energy not into retribution, but into rebuilding. She stepped into the role of active chairwoman of the board, guiding Innovatech with a steady hand and a renewed vision. She promoted Sebastian to permanent CEO, trusting the soul of the company to the man who had always been loyal to it. Together, they purged the growth at all costs culture Julian had instilled, replacing it with a focus on sustainable innovation and employee well-being. The company, under her quiet and decisive leadership, not only stabilized, but began to thrive in a way it never had before. It became a reflection of her, intelligent, resilient, and principled. Her pregnancy progressed, her belly growing with the promise of a new life, a future untainted by the past. The house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary again. She found herself walking through the rooms, no longer seeing ghosts of betrayal, but possibilities for a new kind of family. One cool spring evening, just as the jacaranda trees began to bloom across the city, she went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, but Celeste met every contraction with the same focused strength she had brought to the boardroom. And when it was over, she held her daughter in her arms, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her own determined eyes. She named her Isolde Marlowe. Holding Isolde against her chest, the tiny fingers wrapped around one of hers, Celeste felt the last vestiges of bitterness wash away. The pain of the past year had not broken her. It had reforged her. She had been betrayed. Yes, but she had also discovered a power within herself she never knew she had. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself. She was no longer just the founder, the owner, or the scorned wife. She was Celeste Marlowe, chairwoman of Innovatech, a mother, and the sole architect of her own life. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more whole. Her redemption wasn't about being absolved of a sin. It was about reclaiming her own power and her own story. Looking down at her daughter, asleep in her arms, Celeste knew that the legacy she would leave her wouldn't be one of wealth or corporate success, but one of resilience. She would teach her that foundations are meant to be strong, that trust is a precious gift, and that a woman's power is not something to be given away, but something to be owned, wielded with grace, and defended with fire. The future, in that moment, felt limitless. What happens when the life you've meticulously built?
Welcome Millionaire Lifestyle Story.